Hi there, and welcome to the Chess Doctors channel. In today's lesson, you'll see that we will be doing the opening principles. This is a beginner-friendly course. The first course, I think, will be about 20 lessons. So this is lesson 6. You will see that they are all numbered in sequence. Before we begin with the lesson, just note that all of these lessons are being streamed live on Twitch. So that'll be in the description, and the name is underneath my face here as well. Okay, so let's just have a quick mention at the 6 different types of opening principles that we will be looking at, and then we go from there. So the first thing you want to do, of course, is to control the center. We'll explain that a little bit more. You want to develop your pieces, right? Bring them out, okay? And then you want to get your king to safety. These are the 3 things that you want to do at all times, right? So king safety, obviously you castle your king to the corner, right? If all the pieces want to be in the center, then your king wants to be as far away from that as possible. Okay, another thing is that you want to try and avoid. So the first thing, opening principle number 4, avoid moving pieces twice, okay? The next thing will be avoid bringing out your queen too early, because she just becomes a target, right? And then she gets kicked around and is forced to move twice as well, breaking principle number 4, and it can just be a big problem. And then the last one, which I think a lot of players, even some advanced players, 1800 to 2000 players, still mess up a lot, is the avoiding pawn moves that do not help you develop. Okay, so we're going to look at all of these. Let's get going. Okay, so just to start at the first one, of course, I shall just highlight the center for you. Okay, obviously the green squares are the immediate center, right? The most important squares, and then the yellow squares highlights the bigger center, just so you have an idea of what the central squares, of course, look like, right? So when we say that you want to control or attack as much of the center as possible, then you want to be playing in this area with your pieces, right? So our first example will be a move like e4, right? It develops, it takes part in the center, right? It attacks a square and takes control of a central square, and it also helps your pieces suddenly to be able to come out as well. Okay, black would hopefully try and do something similar. Of course, he has quite a few options, right? e5 would usually be the most logical reply, although there are many other options as well. Okay, so that is just the concept of trying to control as much of the center. So as soon as we put out a pawn out there, 1 or 2 maybe, depending on the opening choice, then you would start to use the second principle, right? So we're going to go to another board. We're just going to plonk out the e4, e5 squares, and then we're going to start looking at developing your pieces, right? So we bring a knight out, right? We develop the piece. It's on a greater center square, and it's also attacking the pawn on e5, and it's also attacking a square on d4, right? So putting more pressure on the center. So an excellent type of move. Black needs to defend the pawn now on e5 and would do something similar by playing knight c6, which also develops the piece towards the center, defends the central pawn, and also puts more pressure on the d4 square. Okay. White now would get his bishop out, let's say. There are, of course, a couple of decent options here, as I point out with the green's highlight, is that bishop b5 would also not be a bad move. Although in general, this bishop c4 move is the most optimal place for the bishop to be, because of course it is on a greater center square and it is cutting through a central square, and it's also attacking one of the most vulnerable points at the start of the game, because the only piece defending the f7 pawn is the king. Okay, black would do something similar, right? Bring out his bishop, good central square, attacking through, attacking here. Great. Now let's say we develop another knight, right? The knight goes to a greater central square, defends our pawn and attacks the central square. Black would do the same, right? Bring out the knight, etc. And this is just the part of developing your pieces, getting them out towards the center so that you can fight for those central squares. Okay, that brings us to our third principle. Okay, skipping to a new board so that we just have the position that we were looking for. White has just, he's taken a part of the center, he's developed some pieces, and now he is ready to focus on his king safety. It only takes one move, right? So he's ready to castle, which is exactly what he does. And now his king is away from the center, right? And this also connects your rooks, because now when the pieces come out, the rooks will be able to also go towards the center. So all of your pieces just want to try and get towards the center. That's generally where the fight will be in most cases. Of course, there's lots of openings where this changes, where we close the center and then we start fighting on the wings and stuff like that. Okay, so here I'm just going to make a couple of moves for black. Black plays, let's say, knight f6. We play knight c3, developing it towards the center, and there black goes and castles as well. Now white would maybe play something like d3, right? Because this guy wants to come out as well, and there will be multiple good squares for the bishop to go to as well. And that's basically our three things that we want to do pretty much always. Okay. So that's the easy part, right? Now we start looking at the things that we try and avoid. So now we go for the next board. And we're going to start looking at just a simple example of why you should try to avoid moving your pieces twice. Okay, so I'm going to be making very bad moves for white here. That's not the point. The point is just to show what happens or what ends up happening if this is what you do. So here white moves his piece twice. Look, the knight is on a great square. It's in the center. However, it's not doing anything specifically right now. So black is clever. Black just continues on with his development, right? Plays the opening principles correctly. And now white moves his knight again, and now black develops a piece, right? Perfectly acceptable. He moves here, and now e5 can be played, because of course if we can get this strong central control with these pawns, that would be great. And now he moves his knight back somewhere, whatever, doesn't really matter. We're just proving the point here. And of course now black again has another move to develop. Let's say we play here. Now you have only developed one piece, and it's in a terrible place, right? You have no central control as white. Black has 3 pieces developed. He has complete central control. He's next going to bring out his bishop to either square that he wants to, and then he's going to get his king to safety. Okay, so by moving a piece twice, you lose tempi, right? And when you lose tempi, that means that those other pieces that you have can't come out. Okay, so that it's a very simple concept, but you will see that people do it a lot. Now, please note, we call these opening principles for a reason. They're not rules; they're principles. They're just things that you can apply in general, right? And they will serve you well. There are a lot of openings where you do break these opening principles, but they're very specific. They're specific to the opening theory, and there are usually very, very specific reasons as to why you do so. Okay. In general, if you are not, if you don't know the theory of a specific opening that you're playing, especially as a beginner, then just focus on doing the things that you should do, right? Taking control of the center as much as you can, developing your pieces as quickly as you can, getting your king to safety, and then you focus on trying to avoid the things that we're looking at now. Try and avoid moving pieces twice, try and avoid bringing your queen out too early, and try and avoid making pawn moves that do not help you develop. Okay, so now let's move on to that second thing we should try and avoid, right? Bringing out the queen too early. So here we're going to look at an example of what can happen when you bring your queen out too early. So white plays a very, very, very cheeky little attempt here where he's threatening to take your pawn on e5, right? I did highlight it. There we go. And he's also attacking on f7. Okay, so he's bringing out his queen very early. Okay, and this is part of a scholar's mate or a fool's mate, if you'd like, right? Idea where they will try and checkmate you within the first couple of moves. Of course, if you're savvy enough, you'll realize what's happening and you'll be able to stop this. So our immediate threat is this pawn. Okay, so we do the most logical thing we can. We develop a piece while defending that pawn and still gaining some space in the center. So the best move would just be to play knight c6. Simple, right? See, defends the pawn, attacks this square and develops the piece in a greater central square. Fantastic. Now white comes in with his initial trick idea, right? He does develop a piece, not a bad move, can't argue with this one. And of course now he has the checkmate threat on f7. So you have to be careful, you have to stop this from happening. Okay, so we could defend it with our queen, but then we would be bringing out our queen too early as well. Not so great. We want to try and avoid that. So the easiest way to stop the checkmate and to also force your opponent to break opening principle number 4, right, to move his pieces twice, is by playing g6. So by playing g6, we stop the threat, right? We're attacking the queen. And of course, the pawn move, if we think quickly about our last principle, we try and avoid making pawn moves that do not help us develop. Technically speaking, this bishop now does have more squares to go to. So it's not a bad move. It also does not impede the knight from moving where it usually would, right? So it is not a move that prevents us from developing in any way, or doesn't help us develop in any way. So now white plays queen f3. So he's moved his queen twice. And note what happens with this queen. Because she came out so early, she's getting kicked around, right? So while I develop, you're moving your pieces twice because I'm kicking your queen around the whole time. So now she's threatening this again, right? So she's threatening checkmate. What would be the best move to adhere to the principles and still stop the checkmate? Let's see if you guys can get it. Hopefully you saw this. Perfect. Knight f6. Good. The queen defends the knight. Now the knight blocks the checkmate. We still develop, right? We develop the piece and we are attacking central squares. The best place for the knight to be. Perfect. Now white throws in his last little cheap trick. Plays here, and now again he has two attackers on this pawn. So we're kind of in a little bit of a bind now. Now we have to make a big decision here. So in this position, we could play the simple queen e7, okay, defending. That's perfectly acceptable because, of course, black bishop can still get out to a different diagonal. It's now unable to come out here, which is not preferable, but it is definitely something you can play. However, in this specific position, there is a very nice little pawn sacrifice, which shows off the concept of why the queen is so bad when she comes out early. Okay, black plays the move d5. Now, note that d5 attacks the center. It attacks this piece, it attacks this pawn, right? It blocks the threat on the f7 pawn. Okay. However, the pawn is attacked 3 times and it's only defended twice. So that means that white can win a pawn. So white, let's say, plays pawn takes. Now our knight is being threatened. However, this is now blocked by his own bishop, right? So here is what we do from here. We now, because we are able to gain tempo by attacking the queen, which decided to come out early, we can now get our pieces in optimal places while still attacking the queen. Knight d4. Now, as you can see that I point out here that we have the obvious threat on the queen, but there's also a beautiful fork threat on c2. So now suddenly this knight is on a fantastic square in the center of the board, right? It's defended by a pawn. So there's, the queen can't capture it even if the queen was attacking it. And it is attacking the queen, forcing the queen to move for the 4th time. 1, 2, 3. And now it's going to move for the 4th time, right? And it's also threatening this fork here. Okay. So now the queen is a little bit awkwardly placed. What does the queen do now? Right? She needs to keep an eye on c2, otherwise, of course, we're going to fork, right? So let's try the 2 only options. If the queen goes to a4 check, by the way, then you can just develop another piece, right? So we're bringing out another piece, and we're again attacking the queen. And now, unfortunately, the queen has only 1 square to go to, boom, to a7. And a5, I mean. And here we can obviously win the rook if we wanted to. However, we could trap the queen thanks to the same forking idea. right? This is a slightly advanced tactic called a decoy, which you will see the videos for later, right? They're in later lessons, I think in the most likely lesson number 28 or something, and it's not part of the beginner lessons. Okay, but I'll show it in the example anyway. We could play bishop b4. Attacking the queen. The queen has no more safe squares to go to except for capturing the bishop. However, if she does, then the fork is now on all of them. Now you win the queen instead. For example, takes, check, king moves, and now you win the queen. So now we're clearly just up a lot of material, right? So now, with that idea in mind, remember that bishop b4 is there in a lot of variations. So if the queen did not go check, the queen could, let's say, go here, right, to defend c2. Now we still have this bishop b4 idea. And now if it captures, check, and you lose your queen once again. Now if the queen goes after bishop b4, it could still go to d3 to defend the pawn. Okay, now we just develop again. Bam! So we're forcing this queen to move over and over again whilst we are developing and taking a bigger chunk of the center. Now the queen has no more squares to go to defend c2, so you will take here and obviously win that rook. Okay, let's say the queen goes here, whatever, we take, and that's it. King goes and we take a rook. So now you're up a whole rook. Problematic for white. Okay. And of course, if the queen tried the other variation where she went here first, bishop would go here, she goes here, and you still have that exact same trick. Perfect. And that is just a simple example of what could, should, and would happen if you bring your queen out too early, which is why you want to try and avoid it. Again, there are quite a few openings where it does happen, but it's very specific, and the queen probably cannot be badgered the way she did here. So no problem if it is specific to the theory of your opening. But in general, try and avoid it. That brings us to our last example, right? Our toughest example, which might take us a little bit of time to just show, and that is to try and avoid moving pawns that do not help us develop. So in this example, I want to show something very simple. It's very stupid, but once again, it just proves my point. After d6, right, it is a move that defends the pawn. However, now you're blocking out your own bishop, which is not great, but you are opening for this bishop, so not the worst move on the planet, but it is not the best either, right? Now let's say white continues on the way white should. Now black starts making preempted moves. He wants to avoid this from coming, right, when the time comes, because he wants to play knight here, okay? But as soon as he does, then this happens, and suddenly the f7 pawn becomes a little bit of a problem for him. So he's thinking, okay, he's going to preempt this strike by playing h6. But h6 doesn't help him develop at all. Right? That pawn does one small function, and that is preventing the knight from going to g5. Okay, white is not phased. White continues on with the things he should be doing. He castles. And now black throws in one last little move here, which again does absolutely nothing. Naturally, most of the time, black wouldn't play this badly, but at the beginner level, this happens all the time. They move their pawns all over the place. Develop your pieces, right? So now we can just hit in the center, d4 immediately, and we start putting a lot of pressure on the center because it's weaker now because it doesn't have as much support from the pieces at this point. Okay, so just a little basic example. Now we're going to show one game real quick, right? And the game was played by me. My opponent was about an 1800. So it just shows you that even stronger players can just like completely think that they don't need to worry about these principles and get destroyed. So here we go. The game is from black side. I was playing black. Now I do break some opening principles in this as well, but again it is very opening specific. Okay, so my opponent plays e4, I play c6, which is called the Caro-Kann defense. For those of you who don't know your openings as of yet, not very important. The point is just that, of course, this pawn now supports this pawn to take a chunk in the center. So it's just a different way of trying to take your bit of control in the center. Okay, white plays d4. Of course, white takes as much of the center as possible. And this is where the little tricky trick move comes in here that I like to play, especially against unsuspecting victims. Knight a6, right? The knight goes to the corner of the board, which is not what you want to do in general, but the knight has a very specific path. It is heading towards c7, which also supports the d5 push. And in a lot of cases, the knight ends up going to the e6 square after a little bit of development. Okay, and then the knight actually does a fairly interesting job in the usual setup that white has, against it at least. Okay, and there's one other little trick here, is that, and which is what I was hoping for, which is exactly what happened. My opponent took on a6 and thought that I would need to take back with a pawn, but I have a little trick up my sleeve, and that is to play check and take with the queen. And now I'm also eyeing, all these lovely white squares when my queen is on a6. So it becomes a little bit more tricky for him to castle. He has to be very, very, very careful of how he goes about it. Now here, white could just play knight c3, which is a good development move towards the center, etc. But my opponent breaks the rule for the first time now. Now he plays c3, right? This move now blocks the knight from being able to go to c3, so it doesn't help him develop, and it even impedes some of his development potential as well. Okay, I continue with taking. He plays knight e2 to block so that he can castle. And now I get a free tempo again. I get to play knight f6, which develops my piece and attacks the pawn on e4. Okay, he now plays e5, which I also do not like, because now he is just weakening his white squares a lot more. Okay, so now my knight's able to go to a central square, right? Boom, it's protected by a pawn, and he cannot push it away with c4 because my queen defends the square at this time. Okay, so he castles, nothing wrong with that. I play d6. I start to challenge his center. I also want to be able to play this move if I can, or here, because again, I want to try and take as much chunky control of these white squares that he has given me. Now he again breaks this principle that we're trying to avoid right now. We're trying to avoid moving pawns that do not help us develop. So he plays f4. He tries to keep his central pawns very strong, which in general is not a bad idea, but in this specific case, again, he's weakening his white squares, right? Let's just undo all of these. Now you can see how weak all these white squares is, because he doesn't have that white squared bishop. He traded it for my knight. Now I get to develop again with tempo. I play knight bishop g4, and of course now I have the double attack on e2, so he has to now defend it because it's also pinned, so he can't just move his knight. So he plays rook f2, and now I just play e6 because I need to develop this bishop, right? It's pretty simple. I'm not trying to do anything fancy here. I'm just thinking about how to develop my pieces. So this is a pawn move that helped me develop, okay? Same with this one. Was a pawn move that helped me develop the bishop, okay? Now he goes and he breaks the rule again. He plays h3. I just softly drop back with bishop h5, keeping the pressure on e2. And now he continues on with this facade. He plays g4 to block my bishop from attacking the knight. I happily go back. The white squares are not going anywhere. And now he keeps going. Look at these pieces. Note that by the end of the game, they are still there. Okay? We're already, how many moves? 11 moves into the game, and he has not developed any of his queenside pieces. Now he plays f5. Now, f5 looks very aggressive. That's nice and all, but it doesn't actually do anything. So I capture, he captures, and my bishop just goes back to h5, renewing the pressure on this knight. Okay, excellent. My bishop's happy. Now he finally moves his queen out of the way because he's threatening now to play his knight to g3, and my bishop would be in a bit of trouble. So I finally decide to trade my bishop for his knight, right? It's one of his only developed pieces. So for me to trade one of my pieces for one of his developed pieces is perfectly acceptable. He takes with the rook, and now I castle longside. So I get my king out of the center, right? I get away from his king with my king. Now I have opportunities of trying to attack his king because, well, it is very bare around his king right now. Look at all this lovely space around his king, and we still have these terrible white squares. Note that he's still unable to attack my knight, so my knight is beautifully placed right here. So now he plays, for the life of me, the last little kicker, he plays a4. So now he wants to attack my king, except he doesn't have any pieces to do so. They're stuck in the back there, doing absolutely nothing. So from here, the game plays itself. I take on e5 because, on e5, because if he takes with a rook, I get to develop with a tempo once again. If he takes with a pawn, I get to develop with a tempo on the king. So I'm just thinking about developing my pieces as quickly as possible. So I took with the rook. I played bishop d6. He dropped his rook back because he was worried about this threat, which would skewer him. A couple of tricks, right? And now that's not what I played. I played rook h to e8. Okay. Very simple move. I attack his rook. I try and take over the open file. And of course, if he takes me, I just replace it with another rook. Why? Because I have perfect development. I have no weaknesses. My pieces are well placed. And he is still sitting with these pieces in the corner. So now he tries to avoid trading. He plays queen g2, right, to defend. So he's trying to hold on to this e-file because he realizes that if I get in there, he's toast. So now I can just hop into the white squares, attacking this again. Now finally he has to take. I take. And now, wait, is that what happened? No, that's not what happened. My bad. He played knight d2. There we go. He played knight d2. Unfortunately, now the bishop is not defending this square anymore. So now I just played knight f4, attacking the queen, who is defending the rook, so she can't go too far. Now he had to make a decision of sacrificing his rook for my knight because otherwise he cannot hold on to this rook. This is not good because of check, and now he's in a lot of trouble anyway. Now he has to go here, and he does lose the rook in the end anyway. Okay, because he blocks his own queen from defending. So that's not an option. So now he had to play rook takes here. I play bishop takes. And after another quick little blunder here, now he's trying to develop these pieces. He plays knight f3, which stops my rook from getting here also. But unfortunately, there is a simple takes, and check, winning the rook. And he resigned. So a very quick game. Right, and the game is practically very simply played by me. I didn't do anything fancy in the game. All I did was adhere to the principles and punished him for breaking them. That's it. So that is the video for you guys. A quick little reminder that I do stream on Twitch. Most of these lessons I do live, so you can come and interact with me. The description will be in the the link will be in the description at the bottom, of course. So yeah, a couple of other things. This will be part of a complete beginner course, as I pointed out, which should be about 20 lessons, maybe 25, give or take. But it's also part of a much larger course, which will include intermediate, advanced, and even expert, and should be roughly about 400 lessons long. So I intend on streaming them live on Twitch and then re-recording them here for YouTube as well. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. And yeah, focus on those opening principles, okay? Make sure that you guys train this as much as possible to avoid getting into any trouble. Thank you for watching. Look forward to the next video, and I'll see you guys soon.